children and their children. May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. May his favor and their children. May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you. He is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming, in your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you. 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 Sing amen. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you. He is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming, in your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you. 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 Sing worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name.
welcome, guys. Good to have you down here.
Excited.
Yeah, love that we get to do conversations and interviews and different things from time to time, which is nice to change it up, and it's being recorded. So you've got to behave. I know Nathan, he's a bit naughty.
It's gonna be a struggle. I don't eat before I talk.
But these guys are a beautiful couple with a beautiful spirit. Love them a lot, and really looking forward to a conversation with you guys. So tell us a bit about your family. I know your kids aren't with you, but tell us a bit about yourselves and your family.
No worries. We have two gorgeous kids. Bella is 8 and Malachi is 5. They're not here because they'd be running riot this morning if they were. They just love church. So they think anywhere they go is church is home for them. So they would just, take over. Nathan and I have been married, how long? 13 years? 13. Yep, 13 years. Long time. I've been at Macquarie for 18 years. Became a Christian at 18. Been there, served. Haven't we done youth, young adults? Lots of different things. Yeah. You can add some.
I'm Nathan, so I'm married to Brooke for 13 years. So I'm half Sri Lankan and half Australian, so I'm a messed up person, so I don't really know where I fit. But I've grown up half my life in Sri Lanka and half my life in Australia, so it gets very confusing.
Are you supporting the cricket? That's a really important question.
Depends who's winning at the time. Most of the time I go for Australia, but, every now and then it's nice to go for the Sri Lankans as the underdogs. So, especially in the T20, I went for them, but they lost. But, love sport, and, I'll talk more later on about who I am.
So. Good. So that's pretty amazing, because to live half your life in one country and have like a connection to both is interesting, and I know you're going to unpack that. But you did go and start a church, and so when I left Macquarie, when we left about nearly 8 years ago now, you guys were coming through and you had a burden in your heart to one day plant a church, and I think the nation of Sri Lanka was obviously on your heart for most of the time I knew you. So you did go out and plant a church, and it's called The Brave, which, by the way, I love that name. It's a cool name. So tell us a bit about that journey. So what's that process been like? So you felt called to Sri Lanka to start a church, called The Brave. Tell us a bit about that, and why you even called the church The Brave.
Yeah, so I never wanted to plant a church, so it was kind of one of those too hard work. I guess for me as a missionary child in Sri Lanka, there was this connection to Sri Lanka, but I remember when I left Sri Lanka, God saying, one day you'll build my church here. And I'm like, no, I won't one day. And I left. And it's just always been that thing that's always been kind of present, and God always reminding me, don't get too comfortable. So it was just always there. First date with Brooke was
hang on, can I say something? It was like an interview.
It was romantic.
Guys.
It was very
seriously,
romantic.
like Nathan had his list of questions.
It's a very romantic.
A job interview. Please unpack that, Brooke.
It really was.
It was romantic. You loved it.
As a female, you kind of think, I need to have some questions just in case it gets a bit, dull and boring over dinner. Well, I didn't need to, guys. Nathan had his full list of
my
questions
first question
ready
is,
to go.
where do you want to live overseas? And where do you feel called to missions or not? And if she answered them wrong, it was over in the first date. So it was pretty much where it started.
And I knew nothing about Sri Lanka on our first date, let me tell you.
So it was just one of those things. Always knew God called us overseas, and Brooke had the same kind of feel. So when we did agree finally that we were kind of, okay, God, Sri Lanka church, we kind of gave it to our pastor, Mark's there. We just went to Mark, we said, hey, this is on our heart, but we're releasing it to you, and whatever you want us to do, we're going to do in our church, because Macquarie was our home, and we're not going to make that our focus, we're going to make where we are our focus. So we just decided to serve at Macquarie. It was like 8 years of serving, and 8 years of people reminding us, when are you going to go to Sri Lanka? But and it was just this thing of, we don't know, and we're not worried about it, because that's God's call, and he'll call us when he's ready, and until then, we're going to build the church that we're in. So that's kind of the process, was just, hey, we're not going to worry about it. We're just going to build where we are locally. We've got to serve in our community, serve in our church, serve with Youth Alive and everything. And then it was through that, just one night at Tim Bassetto's Young Adults Conference. I was there, and God just went, 2019, you're going, kind of. And I went, okay. And pretty much came home, I was with one of the other guys, Matt Wildsmith, and we were just talking about it. Got home, I told Brooke, God's told me when we're going. Like, I felt God call, and I said, but I'm not going to say. No, it's, you tell me when God speaks to you. And left it that, because it was not going to be, we're going to change countries, you're not going to just force her to leave. It's called trafficking. So what we did was just, we left it. And then, Brooke, you can fill in the part where you started
I'm so
crying.
glad that you didn't. I never wanted to know, because I said, if God's calling us both, he's going to speak to us both. So I remember opening night of State Conference 2017. God just dropped it into my spirit. So State Conference, I can't remember, because I cried, I think, a whole week all through worship when God said when we were going, because it actually became real. Like, I think for a long time it was something spoken about, but now when God gave us the year, you're like, oh wow, like, then that kind of just started unpacking it, the whole process of leaving, like, and letting go, and grief and all those things that come with moving countries.
And then that was the process of just going, okay, talk to the senior pastor, go, Mark, this is what we feel. And he was like, yep, that's it. And then from there it was like, you know how you then feel like, okay, we're called to God, so like, and we're going, so it's going to be the great journey. The next 2 years, it's just going to be full of faith and full of highs, but everything went low. And it was like even worse. And you're like, God, you just call us, but how come we're going through all this struggle and all, stress and all these different things was happening, and all our finances were under pressure and everything. You're like, that's not the way it's meant to be. I'm meant to be the chosen one. But it was just this process of and the grief of Brooke leaving. We sold our home because we just felt God say, sell everything, don't have a plan B. And so when you're not having a plan B, it gets very real, because you got no other thing but God. And so that was kind of the process. And 2 years of crying for Brooke, of just grieving family and friends, and then even in Sri Lanka continued, the grief and the journey. So it's a weird, hard way to unpack it, but you just got to trust God. And all we knew was God said go, so we just had to go, no matter the stress or the anxiety or the pressure. You just got to trust God and step out and just go, okay, God, we're going to move. So it was just, that was the pretty much. It went real quick. It was just like, we're going, said bye, and you're on a plane, and you're like, oh, it's happening.
Anyone feel called to India out there, Sri Lanka? Anyone feel that same call?
Yeah.
I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, having left, but going to another nation's a different level again. So you find yourself in Sri Lanka. You've been living there almost 2 years. I've been going to Sri Lanka for 14, 15 years, have a pretty good understanding of the nation and the challenges there. Haven't lived there as long as you guys. Tell us, what are the kind of things, I mean, it's obviously different culture, different language, but what are some of the issues and challenges you face doing a Christian church in a Buddhist nation like Sri Lanka? Tell us, what do you face when you're there? I think it's connected to why you called the church the Brave, right?
Yeah.
Maybe connect that answer in there.
Maybe there. There's two. The culture is a big thing. It being a country that's very strong Buddhist, and a very minority Christian. They don't like conversion, so there's a lot of anti-conversion bills and laws trying to be brought in. And the big thing is, in any religion, all the different religions, if they move and become a Christian, they lose their family, they can lose their inheritance and everything. So there's a big call and a big risk for them as well. And we just felt, for that to happen, people have to be brave. Like, it's going to be this step out of, you got to know who God is. And when they step into it, they're not just stepping into, oh, I'm just a Christian now and life is good. It's, I'm just a Christian now. I've lost my family, my friends, my inheritance, or whatever there was. I can lose it all. So for them to call it, was that when we went, we were just at the heart of letting young people get their identity back. Suicide's a massive thing with teenagers and young adults, because third world country, you're not getting jobs that you've worked really hard, because education's very strong. So our heart was just to give these young people a place where they could actually just express who they are and feel free to just live how they felt in themselves, because you're not allowed to do that when you're in a country where family's pushing you to become a doctor or a lawyer, and sometimes that kind of thing. So we just wanted a place where they could be free and brave to be free. I love that. That was our first kind of call, and then it kind of shifted as well with the mental health side of things and everything. So you want to add in on anything with that?
I just remember the scripture God gave us, which was Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And out of that came the brave, and that's how we kind of were thinking beforehand. We didn't know what we would endure, 2 years ago before we left. But it was like always just holding on to just being strong and courageous and being bold in God when he asks you to step out and especially into the unknown and into a country where you are a minority group. And it's even different, can I just say, even different being a female and being a foreigner. That's another adjustment in itself. So it's...
Well, that's what I was going to ask you guys. Tell us some of the biggest cultural challenges. I've seen the traffic. I mean, there's only so many times you can eat string hoppers and all of the curries and the food. I love it. But by the time I leave Sri Lanka, I'm like, I need a burger. Like, just anyone who's been knows what I'm talking about. But there's so much cultural difference. You're over there serving God. You feel a call there, but at the same time, you're ministering cross-culturally. And if you've never done that, that's a challenge. Language, understanding. Tell us what's that been like just in living, let alone trying to minister.
I struggled just with the heat. Like when we got there, I was just like so bothered and frustrated because it was just so hot. But I think as well, just culturally, I'm so mindful now of, I guess, what I wear and where I go as well. I try not to be on my own too often, just because of, potential culture, and you kind of stand out a bit, so it's a bit interesting. And I think one of the ministry things that we had in lockdown, actually, we were asked to do communion for our brother-in-law's church, and we're doing it together as a couple, and I can't remember what it was, but he said, Brooke, you're not allowed to do this because you're a female. And I just was like, what? He's like, no, that's the ruling in the AOG. And I couldn't believe it, could I? There was just something in me that rose up. I'm like, no, we have to, change that. But I had to be respectful of the culture. I can't just go in and change culture. But for us, the biggest thing, I think it's just loving people, really, isn't it? Loving people where they're at and loving regardless of culture, belief, background.
I mean, the church culture is very, and you would experience it, is because it's like a hierarchy of the pastors closest to God, and he's needed for everything, and that's one of the things we were trying to break, was that you're closest to God yourself, not through a pastor. So you don't need to always get the pastor. You need to just what's God talking to you about, what's God speaking to you. The pastors that encourage you and shepherd you and go, okay, I'll help you through. But the whole thing was. And we were trying to teach the pastors that as well, like my brother-in-law. And it's very hard because we're fighting culture in church. But that's what we really felt was what we were called to do, was build a church that's never been planted in that country. We don't want another church. We want a church that's going to bring freedom, change the culture, and put focus back on you and God, not on the pastor to solve your problems.
Amen.
Yeah. So that was kind of it. But we've, we had really good conversations with pastors and really just going, hey, have a break, take a Sunday off. You don't have to be at church on a Sunday every time, because they just never have a holiday. And so giving them these ideas of, I can actually have a Sunday off and not think about church and just relax with your family.
I feel like that's a problem no matter what country you're in.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love that you're called to bring a message of grace, and we come out of a church that emphasises grace, and I've loved that heritage. I'm interested in, Brooke, if I can just, all the mums in the room, I'm wondering, they're probably thinking, what was it like being a mum of 2 little kids in a unit in that kind of country? Tell us just as a mum, no grandparents, actually you've got Nathan's mum, but tell us just from a mum's perspective what that's been like.
I honestly, when we got there, I wanted to wrap the kids up in cotton wool. I didn't want them to go anywhere. And especially when we arrived in Sri Lanka, it was just after the Easter bombings. So security and threat of another bombing was huge. And we'd literally just got settled. And I remember having to send the kids to school. And of course, you want to send your kids to school, right, for their education and to meet friends. But there was something inside of me. I was had this fear because the kids were going to school and we had army officers with machine guns patrolling the school and the special forces doing bomb checks before the kids started to go to school. And I freaked out a little bit. I'm like, my kids aren't used to this. I'm not used to this. I'm like, how am I going to navigate it? And I just remember God going, I've got your kids, Brooke. I've called you and Nathan, but I've called your kids too. Your kids are going to be okay. And I remember going, okay, God. And I've always had to keep going back to Proverbs 3, verse 5, trust in the Lord, trust in the Lord. And I had to keep going back to that. And even with both kids, they were both really different. Malachi was 2.5 when we left, so he was cute, still in nappies. But everywhere we would go, he would, and I didn't realise that it affected him to start off with. Like, all the locals would want to touch him and pat him and just make a fuss of him. But then he developed this thing that if someone came in his personal space, he started growling at them. So I remember as a mum, I'm going, okay, well, he doesn't like this, so I need to be watching him. And then obviously for Bella, having to pray for her a lot because she would miss her friends back home. And schooling in Sri Lanka is tough. It's not laid back and relaxed like Aussie schooling. So she just wanted to come back to Australia's schooling. So that was fun navigating that. But in saying that, we've seen our kids are so resilient, aren't they? We just don't realise how resilient kids are, and they've grown to even love Sri Lanka themselves, haven't they? Even Malachi, when we came here, he thought he was born in Sri Lanka, not Australia. So it's just, they get immersed in the culture too. So, yeah.
I mean, you're very modest, but you guys got there, the global pandemic hit, less than 12 months later. You're on hard lockdown, 2 kids in a high-rise, no school. It was hard enough for everybody. No JobKeeper. There's nothing going on over there. So how hard was it to live through a global pandemic in a nation like that? It was hard enough here, let alone there.
It was so tough. We did 18 months of online schooling. Like, that was just next level for us. And like, initially when we got told we're going in for a 3-day lockdown, it went to 3 months, but it was a hard lockdown. So we couldn't even go and get food. We couldn't go out and exercise. Like, we had to rely on trucks that would turn up. I remember working and going, okay, I'm bailing on this. I've got to go down and line up at a food truck and, hope that I can get stuff. I remember one day, though, going, I've got I think it was butter or milk or something. I remember praying to God, and literally within half an hour, we had a truck there. Not only did it have butter, milk, it also had ice cream. So I'm like, God, you care for everything. Like, but it was a huge stretch mentally and emotionally. But in saying that, God did bring beauty out of it. We got to meet our neighbours, and we made friendship with them. Our kids made friendship. Like, if we didn't have the lockdown, everyone's so busy doing life in Sri Lanka, you just kind of pass your neighbours by. So that was one really beautiful thing that came out of the lockdown, which, it was tough.
Yeah, very tough. It was, kids were doing, Bella was from 7 in the morning till 1:30 in the afternoon, online school, like non-stop, and I had to learn maths again and English, so I was struggling. Thank goodness for Google. But it was really hard on the kids, and mentally it's draining. You just sit there and go, God, what are we doing here? We can't leave. We can't help anyone. We can't do church. So it takes a big mental toll on you. But when you just know, we just kept going back, God said, stay. We had an opportunity to leave. And ACCI, which is told us, missions relief for us, they said, get out now, otherwise you're on your own. And then we had the same thing from the government, get out now or you're on your own. And so we always thought, no matter what happens, if there's a war, Australia will get us out. That's, you always felt, they're not going to stop you from leaving because you're an Australian citizen. And so that moment when they said you're on your own was hey, you're going to left, Australia's not going to help you for a while. So it was but when God's called you, you just know, and you take time off, you just breathe, you relax in God, and you just see the beauty. You see the relationships in the stressful moments, and things are going wrong, but you can see what God's doing. And that's the things you kind of hold on to and help you get through. And that was it, yeah.
A couple more questions, guys. I'm inspired. I hope you're inspired hearing this. I'm inspired by people who take a risk for God, whether it's across the nation, whether it's across the street. And one of the best quotes I've ever heard, and maybe you've heard this before, is that you cannot fulfill your calling while staying in your comfort zone. I think it's so true. And to be really honest, not to offend anybody, a lot of Christians are living in a comfort zone, staying in their safe little bubble. There's a calling on their life. They're not prepared to step out. You guys have done that, and it's not to, make you seem, all the glory. God gets the glory for it. But I want to know, as a couple who have stepped out of your comfort zone, you really have, how has God grown you? Tell me, because all the big faith people I know are all people who've taken big risk. So tell me how your faith has grown, what God's done in you in the last 2 years.
Yeah, definitely our faith's grown. Like, it's so much easier, isn't it, to stay in your comfort zone. But you realise when you do step out, you don't rely on your comfort anymore. You don't have those securities that you once had, or really, it's everything. Everything is in God, and it's just trusting Him with everything. And I felt like, especially in that lockdown, when we couldn't do anything, I just really felt like God's like took me to that next level of faith and trust in Him, especially when we're questioning everything. And I remember one day having a little bit of a pity party, as you kind of do. And I remember standing at my washing machine outside, because I was probably crying about being stuck in there or something. Anyway, I remember the Holy Spirit saying to me, Brooke, I've called you to the nation of Sri Lanka. I called you there when you were like 19 or 20, not knowing that I'd be in Sri Lanka. And He's like, and you're there? And I'm like, yeah, I am, God. Like, what you do say does come, like, it does come to pass. But it doesn't say it's, in James, it says about testing of your faith. It builds perseverance, and it builds character. It builds trust. And stepping out of your comfort zone definitely builds those things in you, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's that whole thing. Like when you're leaving, in your comfort zone, it's easy to just do things, and you always have a fallback. Yeah. So when you always have that fallback, it's hard to step out a bit further because you. So when we left, it was this. There's nothing but God. So you have to trust on Him. Right. You've got no other choice. You have to grow in faith. You have to grow in relationship with Him. Otherwise, you're in trouble. So it does. And the more you step out of that comfort zone, the more you realise you're closer to God.
Yes,
in your comfort, you kind of have this thing of I don't need God as much. But when you step out, even if it's that one little step, you don't have to leave the nation, nothing. But when you just step out and just go, you know what, I'm just going to get close. You're actually stepping towards God. You're stepping closer to Him and to His purpose and His love and His grace for you. And as you get closer to Him, is when you give up more. So our faith. We went with the thing of telling the nation to be strong and courageous, but we ended up having to be the ones who had to learn to be strong and courageous, to trust on Him and to lean on Him. And that's what it is. The stepping out is not a thing of, it's for other people. The stepping out's for you. Stepping out's for your relationship to get stronger, your faith to grow in Him, and have this resistance that no matter what happens, you know where God is, and you know God is good. Even when something bad happens, and even through all the lockdowns, we just always said God is good. God is great because
all
we're
the
closer
time,
to Him. All the time. Yeah, but it is, and it's that relationship. And when you step there, it's a great place to be. And Chris Estrada says, the most dangerous places can be the safest places if God's called you there. And that's what we really believe. It doesn't matter. You might feel scared.
That'll preach.
God will that'll preach. And it is the safer you felt in God, even through COVID and not knowing what's happening in 3 months and how dense COVID was killing a lot of people. We had lots of people we know that got COVID or died from COVID, but we just felt safe there, and we felt safe with our kids, and we never felt anything because you just know nothing but God. And
Wow, that was inspiring. Well, you should give them a hand for that answer. That's so good. We are almost out of time, so I love that. Safest places in the will of God. Nath, I want to finish with this, and then I'm going to get you guys to pray over our people. But tell us your story. Come on, I've saved the best for last. So, Sri Lankan heritage, obviously a deep connection to that nation. I've heard your testimony, a bit of your testimony. No one here would have. Tell us why Sri Lanka matters so much. Tell us about your family heritage and about what God's done in your life.
Yes. The way to start, let's go. So my father's Rohan. He was from Sri Lanka, moved to New Zealand to do Bible college, then came over here, met my mum. They got married. Mum was pretty young. And then I was 3 months old, and Mum and Dad felt, let's go back to Sri Lanka. So we were missionary kids, and we went straight in 1983, went to Sri Lanka. We got there during the worst racial riots Sri Lanka is known, where a lot of Tamil people were getting killed on the streets, and because of the race stuff that was happening between Tamils and Sinhalese. My dad was very passionate about saving people, so he was out on the streets rescuing Tamils and bringing them back home and hiding them. He was also in Bible college, the lecturer at the AOG Bible College, and his passion and his heart was always to just love people. Love each person, not just preach at them. And he had that. He had a passion to plant a church. We planted it, and we moved to the hill country in Aurelia, where we planted a church way back when there was nothing nice. So it's really cold and very isolated. But when we got there, within a year or two, there was a siege in the war that was happening in Sri Lanka, and my dad just was invited by the ex-college students to come and preach and meet them and see them in Jaffna, where the war was. Mum wasn't keen on it, but Dad was like, we've got to go. We've got to love the people. We've got to get there. Anyway, Dad went there. I was 4 years old, and he went there, and he was only there for like a weekend, and he was coming back. But while he was there, the Tamil Tigers had seen what he was doing, where he was travelling, and they were a bit concerned about it. And they followed him for a while. And then on the last day, when he was dropping off some students and then they were going to come back, he was killed by ambushed and killed by the terrorists in the area. And that puts a big effect, because I was still 4 years old, but all of a sudden Mum was crying unconsolably. Like, she was just, and had no idea what was happening, couldn't understand, didn't know where my dad was. But it had an effect on me in the sense of I didn't really love the country that much. It'd taken my dad, it's put us in this situation, and it wasn't the best place for me to want to live, and I wanted to come back here. So we eventually at about 12, I just said, Mum, I'm coming back to Australia. I'm done here. It's just too much. I don't want to come. I don't want to live here. So we moved. I moved here first. Lived with my mum's new husband. He was engaged at that time, Narrell, and then Mum moved over. And at that time, God still said to me, you're going to come back. And I'm like, no, God, no way. I ran away from it all as hard as I could. I loved God always, but just refused to accept that I'm going to come back to Sri Lanka. And over time, it kind of slowly changed. But I think it was 5 years into marriage, we went over and the war finished, and we finally got to go to Jaffna. I'd never been. Always heard the stories about, Dad died here, Dad this. And we went and we saw the place where Dad was killed and ambushed, and we met the pastor that was there, who was tied up while they waited for him to come. And we're just speaking with him. And the thing that stood out was he said, as students, we used to have to travel to Colombo to do Bible college. And it's a long drive. They do overnight, So they get there and they're tired. And he goes, your dad would always meet us with a cup of tea. He'd take our clothes and get them washed and bring them back. And that's what really hit was, for my life, and why I got this heart for Sri Lanka and heart for people, is it's not how good you can preach. It's not the number of people you have. But it's that moment where you bring a cup of tea to someone. It's that moment where you'll just do the little thing. And those churches are now 30 years on from when Dad died. But those churches have grown beyond. And the impact they've had throughout that entire country is amazing. And the thing was, it was a cup of tea that they remembered. It wasn't, he came and preached and 10,000 got saved. No, he gave them a cup of tea, and that's what they needed in the morning. And, you might think, when you called, you think you're meant to be on the stage and speak. No, you're meant to just love someone. Very good. Come on. That's your call. And God's call to you is it's simple. It's love him first, love people. And that's what we feel his calling is. And that's really transformed me, and that really changed my attitude towards willing to go back to Sri Lanka. It wasn't that I wanted to plant a church. It was, I want to love people. I'm going to love people no matter what the nation is.
Very good.
So,
Let's give them a hand. That's so good. Awesome.